The rain had been coming down steady since late afternoon, the kind that draped the world in gray and made headlights smear against the wet pavement. By the time I left work, the parking lot was a blur of reflections, water gurgling down the drains, and the smell of asphalt turned raw and sharp. I had stayed later than usual, mostly because I didn't want to face the drive home in the storm. But once the sky turned darker and most of the office lights flicked out one by one, I had no excuse left. I grabbed my coat, braced myself, and jogged to the car, umbrella useless against the sheets of water slanting sideways in the wind. The drive itself was a crawl. Wipers slapped frantically at the windshield, barely keeping up with the torrents. The radio kept cutting in and out with static, and when I tried my phone for music, the signal wavered too. It was one of those nights where the world felt cut off, like civilization shrank to whatever your headlights could touch. I told myself it was just weather, nothing more, but I couldn't shake the prickling awareness that always came with storms. The way power could fail, roads could wash out, and strangers could become threats when you were trapped with nowhere to run. By the time I pulled onto the long stretch of county road, I was already gripping the wheel too hard. No other cars, no streetlights, just the rain slamming down and my tires slicing through puddles that grabbed at the steering. The world outside was a wall of trees, fields drowned in water, and blackness pressing at the edges. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, not sure why, but the sight of empty road behind me made my stomach tight instead of calming me. It felt like something should have been there. The first sign that something was wrong came about 10 minutes later. Through the wash of rain, I caught the shape of someone walking on the shoulder, a tall figure hunched against the downpour, moving slow. I thought maybe it was a farmer from one of the houses tucked back in the woods, but the more I watched, the less sense it made. They had no umbrella, no raincoat, just a dark outline soaked through. I slowed as I passed, and in the corner of my eye, I swore I saw their head turn toward me. But the face was lost in shadow, rain bouncing off their skin like they didn't care. For a split second, I considered stopping, but the idea of rolling down the window or letting someone into my car out here in the storm twisted my gut. Something about the figure didn't feel right, too still, too deliberate in the way they moved. I pressed the accelerator, telling myself someone else would stop, that I wasn't heartless, just cautious. My headlights swallowed the road again, and I forced myself not to look in the mirror. Not 10 minutes later, I saw another one. This time it was on the opposite side of the road, standing still in the weeds, facing the trees. Just standing there. I slowed again, staring through the rain, but the figure never moved, never turned. It looked like a man, tall and lean, but the way he stood, straight-backed and rigid, gave me goosebumps. I passed him quickly, my chest tightening, the steering wheel slick under my palms. Something was off, more than just people caught in a storm. I started counting minutes, watching for the next one, as if I already knew there would be another. And there was. A mile or so ahead, another figure. This one was crouched near a drainage ditch, head bent low, arms dangling strangely. My high beams caught the pale flash of a face, but it wasn't clear. My breath hitched, and I sped past, heart hammering, telling myself it had to be coincidence. But coincidence didn't line up like that, one after another, each stranger placed exactly far enough apart to keep me on edge. When I reached the intersection near the gas station, I almost pulled in just to get out of the rain and away from the road. But the station was dark, the kind of close that wasn't temporary, boards over the windows, weeds sprouting up through the concrete. I didn't even slow down. I just pressed harder on the gas, watching the trees blur and listening to the rain roar on the roof. I had maybe 20 miles left to get home, and I kept repeating that number in my head. 20 miles, like a mantra. 20 miles, then I'd be safe. 20 miles, then it would just be me and the storm outside my window, instead of these figures planted along the road. But the rain only grew heavier, and the figures kept appearing. Some walking, some standing, some crouched in unnatural poses, like they'd been left there and forgotten. None of them carried flashlights, umbrellas, or bags. None of them even looked properly dressed for the storm. They just stood or walked or bent unnaturally, their faces blurred by the sheets of rain. My knuckles ached from gripping the wheel. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, that I was tired and strung out from work, that my eyes were inventing patterns in the rain. But then I saw one of them up close, too close. A man stepped out into the road as I rounded a curve, forcing me to slam the brakes. The car fishtailed, my heart leaping into my throat, and for a split second my headlights lit him perfectly. His clothes were soaked, hanging like rags, and his skin was bone pale, too pale for someone out in the weather. His mouth hung slightly open, lips bloodless, and his eyes, they were wrong. Not wide, not blinking, just blank, like glass. I swerved around him, tires screaming, and when I checked the mirror, the road was empty. No one there. Nothing at all. That's when panic set in. I couldn't convince myself anymore that these were just strangers caught in the rain. They weren't right. None of it was right. My breath came too fast, fogging the glass, and the thought of stopping, of breaking down, of having to get out of the car, it was unbearable. I kept going, faster than I should have on a road half flooded by rain, whispering to myself to just make it home. But the storm seemed endless, the miles stretching longer than they should have. My phone showed no service when I tried it, the screen useless and mocking, and the figures didn't stop. They were everywhere now. Some in the fields, some lining the ditches, some standing shoulder to shoulder like a broken fence. I caught glimpses of faces that looked too pale, too still, arms that hung too long, shadows where shadows shouldn't be. At one point, I thought I saw one crawling on all fours across the soaked ground, its head snapping up toward my car as I passed. My stomach lurched so hard I thought I might vomit. When the first sign for my town appeared, 15 miles, I almost cried. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the road, to ignore whatever else my headlights caught. I thought maybe if I didn't look at them, they'd stop being there. But out of the corner of my eye, I still saw them, standing just off the shoulder, waiting, watching. Faces turned toward me as though the car itself pulled them in. Then something worse happened. I realized one of them wasn't outside anymore. It started as a reflection in the rearview mirror. I glanced up and saw the pale oval of a face in the back seat, blurred by shadows. My whole body froze, my brain refusing to accept it. I whipped my head around, and of course the seat was empty. Just coats. Nothing else. But when I looked back at the mirror, the face was there again, closer this time. Water dripping from hair that clung to its forehead. Blank eyes locked on mine. I nearly lost control of the car. My foot slammed the gas. The engine roared, and I refused to look again. My chest ached from how hard my heart was beating, every nerve in me screaming to pull over, to get out. But there was nowhere to go that was safer than forward. I drove like that for what felt like hours, headlights slicing through rain, the sound of water hammering the roof, and the certainty that I wasn't alone in the car anymore, no matter what my eyes told me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I didn't remember the last few miles. My hands were trembling, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I shut the engine off and just sat there, rain pounding the windshield, trying to find the courage to look into the back seat. I told myself I had imagined it, that fear had gotten the better of me. But when I finally turned, slow and shaking, I swear I saw the last drop of water fall onto the seat, soaking into the fabric, though nothing else was there. I bolted into the house without even locking the car, dripping wet, chest heaving. I turned on every light, checked every room, every closet. Nothing. Just the storm outside, rattling the windows, making the roof creak. I tried to calm down, to tell myself I was safe, but even now, I can't sleep when it rains, because every time the sky opens up and the world blurs into gray, I hear them again. The steady footsteps just beyond the window, the blank faces staring out from the tree line, waiting for me to look. Story the end. The rain was steady that night, hammering the rooftops in a way that made every street in the small Pennsylvania town feel deserted. The kind of rain that muffles sound, turns the air heavy, and makes shadows bleed together under the dim yellow glow of the streetlights. Ryan kept his jacket pulled tight as he jogged across the slick pavement toward the diner, his sneakers slapping water with each step. The place had become something of a safe spot for him during storms like this. A corner booth by the window where he could drink coffee, watch the rain, and pretend the world outside wasn't as ugly as it often was. Inside, the bell above the door chimed faintly, and the warmth of fried food and burnt coffee wrapped around him. A few late-night regulars sat in their usual places, and the waitress, an older woman named Marcy, offered him a nod before pouring him a cup without asking. He slid into his booth, brushing rain from his hair, and looked outside. It was always the same sort of crowd during nights like this. Truckers, loners, a couple drunks who'd stumbled in to escape the storm. But that night, there was something different. A man sat in the far corner of the diner, shoulders hunched, his coat dripping onto the cracked vinyl seat. He didn't order anything. He didn't look up. His hands were pressed flat on the table, and he stared at them as if he were afraid of what they might do. Ryan told himself not to stare, but the man had a way of drawing his eyes back. His hair was plastered against his skull, his face pale in the fluorescent light, and every so often his lips moved like he was whispering to himself. The storm outside rattled the windows, thunder rolling in low waves, but even over all that, Ryan thought he could hear the man's muttering. Marcy brought Ryan his coffee and leaned in, lowering her voice. "Don't mind him. Came in about an hour ago. Hasn't said a word since." Ryan nodded, but unease crawled up his spine. There was something about the man that didn't sit right, not just the silence, but the way his eyes never moved from the table, as if looking up would be dangerous. Around midnight, the diner thinned out. The truckers left, the drunks wandered back into the rain, and eventually it was just Ryan, Marcy, and the stranger. Ryan kept sipping his coffee, trying to convince himself to leave, but when he glanced outside, he realized how hard the rain was coming down. It was more than a storm. It was a wall of water, the kind that erased the streets and made the world feel smaller, tighter, almost like the diner was the last place left. Marcy wiped the counter and finally walked toward the corner booth. "Sir, you want anything? Coffee? Food?" The man didn't answer. She tried again, and this time he looked up. Ryan caught a glimpse of his eyes and immediately wished he hadn't. They were bloodshot, rimmed with deep purple shadows, and filled with something that was neither sadness nor anger, but something worse, something that looked like resignation. "I can't eat," the man whispered, his voice hoarse, like his throat was raw. "It won't let me." Marcy froze. "Won't let you?" The man's hands twitched on the table. His nails were chewed down, the skin around them raw and bleeding. "It's outside," he said, just loud enough for both of them to hear. "It follows me when it rains. Always when it rains." Ryan's stomach knotted. He wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of someone unstable, but there was a conviction in the man's voice that made it impossible to laugh off. Marcy cleared her throat, trying to hold her ground. "Well, you're safe in here. Nothing's getting through those doors." The man's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You don't understand." Thunder cracked above, making the lights flicker. Ryan turned to the window and caught something in the reflection, not in the glass itself, but in the space beyond, a shape that moved between the glow of the street lamps. It was quick, almost too quick to register, but it was tall, much taller than a man. When he blinked, it was gone, and he told himself it had been the rain distorting the light. But when he glanced back at the stranger, he saw that the man's eyes were fixed on the window too, and they were wide with terror. Marcy muttered something about calling the sheriff, but before she could move, the stranger's hands shot out and grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "Don't," he hissed. "If you call anyone, it'll know. It likes attention." Her face went pale, and she slowly pulled free, retreating behind the counter. Ryan didn't move, though his heart hammered in his chest. The stranger looked at him now as if choosing him specifically. "You've seen it, haven't you?" the man asked. "In the reflection." Ryan swallowed hard. "I don't know what I saw." The man leaned forward, his voice dropping lower, almost a growl. "It doesn't matter what you think you saw. What matters is that it knows you noticed." The rain seemed to intensify, slamming against the windows like fists. The lights flickered again, and for a split second, Ryan thought he saw a long, spindly hand pressed against the glass, fingers too thin, too sharp. Then it was gone, leaving only streaks of water. Ryan shoved his coffee aside and stood up, shaking his head. "I'm not doing this. I'm not sitting here listening to whatever this is." The stranger didn't move. His eyes followed Ryan, and his mouth twisted into that half-smile again. "You'll wish you listened." Ryan pushed through the door into the storm. The rain drenched him instantly, soaking through his jacket, plastering his hair to his forehead. The streets were deserted, the sound of water rushing through gutters, the only noise besides the constant rumble of thunder. He pulled his hood up and started walking quickly toward his car, parked 2 blocks down. But halfway there, he froze. Someone was standing at the far end of the street. At first, he thought it was just a pedestrian caught in the rain, but then he realized how wrong that was. The figure was too tall, impossibly so, its head nearly level with the street lamp beside it. Its arms hung unnaturally low, swaying slightly, and even through the storm, Ryan could see that its face, or what should have been its face, was a shifting blur, as if the rain itself was sliding across where features should be. His breath caught in his throat. He stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the slick sidewalk, and when he looked again, the figure was gone. He sprinted the rest of the way to his car, fumbling with his keys, his hands trembling too hard to fit the key in the lock at first. When he finally yanked the door open and slid inside, slamming it shut, he locked the doors and sat in the darkness, gasping for breath. The rain hammered on the roof, the windows fogging from his own panicked breathing. He forced himself to turn the key, the engine sputtering before roaring to life. Headlights cut through the rain, illuminating the empty street ahead. He pulled out, tires splashing through puddles, desperate to get home, to get away from whatever the hell he had seen. But as he drove, he kept catching glimpses of movement in the mirrors. A flicker in the side mirror, a shadow in the rear view. Once, he swore he saw that same blurred face leaning too close to the glass, watching him from the back seat, though when he whipped his head around, the seat was empty. The storm didn't let up, not even as he turned down his street. By the time he parked outside his apartment, his nerves were shredded, his chest tight with fear. He ran inside, slamming the door behind him, locking it, double-checking it, then pressing his back to it as if that could keep something out. The rain continued outside, steady, unrelenting. He tried to convince himself it was over, that he was safe now, but as he stood there, he realized something chilling. The sound of the rain had changed. It wasn't just hitting the roof and windows anymore. It sounded closer, like it was dripping inside. Ryan's eyes moved slowly to the hallway that led to his bedroom, and his stomach dropped. The carpet was wet. A trail of water led down the hall, pooling in dark spots, then like as if someone had walked through the storm and into his apartment. And then he heard it, footsteps, slow, deliberate, squelching against the soaked floor. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He stood frozen, heart slamming against his ribs as the sound grew closer. When the figure finally emerged into the faint light of the living room, its height forced it to stoop beneath the ceiling, its arms dragging against the floor, leaving streaks of water in the carpet. Its face was still blurred, still shifting, but now Ryan could hear it whispering. Words he couldn't make out, except for one. His name. The storm outside roared on and the lights flickered. Ryan's last thought before the darkness swallowed the room was that the stranger at the diner had been right. It always comes when it rains. And once you see it, it never leaves. Story the end. The rain had been coming down hard since late afternoon, turning the roads into shallow streams and the air into something cold and oppressive. Most people had hurried home before dark, the storm making the little town look emptier than usual. By the time the streetlights flickered on, the only sounds were the steady hiss of rain and the occasional car splashing past. I hadn't planned to be out so late, but the weather had caught me off guard. My windshield wipers struggled to keep up, smearing water across the glass instead of clearing it, and I felt a creeping unease as the visibility worsened. I'd taken a detour through the back roads to avoid flooding on the main stretch of highway, a decision I almost instantly regretted. The road I was on twisted through dense woods, no shoulder to pull off on, no houses for miles, just the towering shapes of dripping pines leaning close to the narrow asphalt. The rain drummed relentlessly on the roof of my car, and every so often lightning cracked far off in the distance, followed by the low growl of thunder that seemed to crawl across the ground beneath me. The strangeness began when I saw the figure. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks. Rain and headlights can do that. But as I slowed down, it became clear. A man was walking along the side of the road, hunched over, his clothes plastered to him with rain. He didn't have an umbrella, didn't even look like he had a jacket, just a soaked shirt clinging to him. What really unsettled me was that he wasn't moving like someone who had a destination. He wasn't trying to wave down a car or find shelter. He was just walking slowly, head tilted down, arms hanging oddly stiff at his sides. Instinct told me to keep driving. In weather like this, you don't stop for strangers. But as I passed, my headlights caught his face. He looked right at me, straight into the car, his eyes wide and unblinking. His mouth moved just slightly, like he was mouthing something I couldn't hear. It was so quick, the image of his pale, water-slicked face burned into me before I could even process it. I drove another half-mile before I realized I was shaking. My heart was pounding too hard, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me but sheets of rain and darkness. Still, I couldn't shake the image. His lips had been moving. He had wanted to say something or warn me of something. The rain thickened, forcing me to slow down even more. My headlights seemed weaker by the second, barely carving through the wet night. That was when I saw him again. He was ahead of me, walking just as before, shoulders slumped, face downward. But I knew that I had driven past him already. It wasn't possible for him to be ahead of me again. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching on the slick asphalt, and skidded just short of him. My chest heaved as I stared at him standing motionless in the road, the rain hammering down on both of us. He slowly lifted his head and looked at me. This time his mouth moved wider, exaggerated, as if shouting something without sound. His eyes were locked on mine, wide, unblinking, hollow. My first thought was that maybe he was hurt or delirious. I rolled down the window just a crack, rain blowing in, and shouted, "Do you need help?" No sound came from him, but his lips kept forming words, faster, more desperate. I leaned closer, trying to make sense of it, and for a split second I thought I recognized the words. "Don't stop." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I fumbled to roll the window back up and slammed my foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, spraying water, and I swerved around him. In the rearview mirror, I saw him again, standing completely still in the middle of the road, head tilted, watching me vanish into the storm. I should have turned around. I should have gone back to the highway, even if it was flooded. But panic drove me forward, deeper into the winding woods. The storm seemed to intensify the farther I went, the rain hammering the roof so hard it drowned out everything else. My wipers squealed in protest, useless against the torrent. I was hunched over the wheel, squinting through the blur when the lights of a house appeared ahead. It sat off to the side of the road, an old farmhouse with sagging shutters and a single porch light burning weakly through the rain. Relief hit me so strong it was almost dizzying. I pulled into the muddy driveway, tires slipping, and killed the engine. The rain was deafening when I stepped out. My shoes sank into the mud and cold water soaked my jeans instantly. I bolted up the porch steps and pounded on the door. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time, calling out. My voice felt small, smothered by the storm. After a long pause, the door creaked open on its own, a narrow crack, enough for warm air to waft out. I hesitated, dread crawling up my spine, but the thought of staying out in the storm pushed me forward. I stepped inside. The house smelled musty, like wet wood and dust. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by a single bulb swinging overhead. Water dripped from my clothes onto the warped floorboards as I called out again. "Hello. Sorry to barge in. My car couldn't make it through the storm. Is anyone here?" The silence pressed in heavy. The only sound was the steady ticking of an old grandfather clock at the end of the hall. Then, faintly, I heard movement upstairs. A creak of floorboards, slow and deliberate. Relief flickered again. Someone was home. I stepped farther inside, shutting the door against the roar of rain, and called out once more. The footsteps above me stopped. I waited, staring up at the ceiling, straining to hear. The silence stretched so long it felt unnatural. Then softly, from the staircase behind me, came the sound of breathing. I spun, my stomach lurching. The staircase was dark, the light from the hallway barely touching the first few steps. But in the shadows above, I could make out a figure standing there. Not moving, just standing and watching. My voice caught in my throat. I didn't mean to intrude, I just need to wait out the storm. The figure didn't respond. Slowly, it descended one step. The wood groaned under its weight, another step, then another. I should have run then, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they'd sunk into the warped floor. The figure finally came into the light. It was the same man, the one from the road. Water dripped from his clothes, though he hadn't come in from outside. His pale face glistened in the dim light, and his lips moved again, silently shaping the same words as before. Don't stop. This time, though, I could hear something faint. A wet rasp, almost drowned out by the storm. My brain barely registered it as words. Don't stop running. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs, and bolted for the door. My hands slipped on the knob, but I yanked it open and plunged back into the rain. The driveway was nearly washed out, but I sprinted to my car, slipped into the driver's seat, and slammed the locks down. My breath came in gasps as I tried to start the engine. For a terrifying second, it sputtered uselessly. Then it roared to life. Headlights cut through the rain, and in their glow, I saw the man standing on the porch, perfectly still, watching. His mouth moved one last time before he turned and stepped back into the house. I tore down the road, tires skidding, nearly losing control on the slick asphalt. My knuckles were white on the wheel, eyes straining through the sheets of water. I didn't look back again. It took me over an hour to find my way back to the highway, and when I finally did, I pulled into a gas station and sat shaking in the parking lot until the rain eased enough to see. I tried to explain it later, to convince myself I'd imagined it all, that the storm had twisted things in my head, but the words he mouthed, the rasping whisper that followed me even in my dreams, never left me. And sometimes when it rains like that again, hard enough to drown out the world, I swear I hear him breathing behind me. Story. The end. The rain had started just after sunset, one of those slow drizzles that promised to last all night. It wasn't violent, not at first, just steady enough that the sound of it filled the air, tapping rooftops, soaking the ground, turning everything slick and glistening in the dim streetlights. By the time it grew heavier, the streets were nearly empty, most people retreating indoors to the comfort of their homes. But for me, that night wasn't about comfort. I was stuck outside in it, driving on roads that seemed darker than usual, as though the rain had absorbed the light before it could scatter across the asphalt. I'd been coming back from a late shift, the kind that left you tired, foggy, and just desperate to crawl into bed. The highway was too dangerous in weather like this, so I'd taken the back roads, a mistake I realized quickly. The old country lanes were narrow and winding, lined with trees that hung heavy with water, their branches bending low as if bowing to the storm. Every so often, my headlights would catch a flash of something reflective in the distance. Road signs, wet bark, the glint of puddles. But my tired brain kept thinking it was movement. By the time I noticed the figure on the side of the road, I'd nearly passed them. At first, I thought it was a trick of the rain, some shadow leaning at the edge of the woods. But no, it was a person, standing alone, drenched from head to toe, their hair plastered to their head, clothes clinging to them like a second skin. I should have kept driving. I know that now. But something about them, the way they weren't even trying to wave me down, just standing there staring at the pavement, made me slow. I rolled the window down just a crack, letting the cold, wet air whip inside. "Hey," I called out. "You okay?" The person, a woman maybe in her 20s, didn't move right away. Then, slowly, her head turned toward me. Her eyes looked almost glassy, like she was somewhere else entirely, and her lips moved as if she were whispering to herself. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "You need a ride?" I asked, though part of me was praying she would shake her head. She nodded once. That was it. No expression, no words, just a single, almost imperceptible nod. I unlocked the door, and she slid into the passenger seat without a sound. Water pooled instantly on the upholstery, dripping from her sleeves and hair. I stole a quick glance at her, trying not to be obvious. Her clothes were plain, jeans, a dark hoodie, but they looked old, threadbare in places. Her skin was pale, too pale, and the way she sat, hunched and unmoving, made it seem like she had been standing in that rain far longer than anyone should. "Where you headed?" I asked, easing the car forward again. Her lips moved, but I could barely hear her over the drumming of rain. I leaned a little closer. "Sorry, what?" she whispered again, this time clearer, though her voice was hoarse like she hadn't spoken in days. "Home." That was all she said, just home. I nodded, waiting for more, but she didn't continue. I had to press. "Where's home? Do you have an address?" Her eyes slid toward me, then back to the road. Finally, she raised one trembling hand and pointed straight ahead, so I drove, The roads grew narrower, the trees closer, and soon the only light came from my headlights cutting tunnels through the rain. I tried a few more times to get her to talk, but she never said much beyond a word or two. When I asked her name, she stared at me blankly for a long moment before whispering, Leela. The name didn't feel right, like it had been pulled from somewhere distant. After about 15 minutes of driving, the road turned into gravel, then dirt, the sound of rocks crunching under the tires almost deafening against the backdrop of rain. She lifted her hand again, pointing left, and I followed until the trees broke into a clearing. What I saw made me hesitate. It was a house, or what had once been a house. The place was falling apart, the roof sagging, the siding blackened with rot. The porch tilted to one side, and the windows were either broken or so fogged with grime they looked opaque. No lights shone from inside. The whole structure looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. I slowed to a stop, glancing at her. "This it?" She nodded. Then, for the first time, she turned her whole body to face me. Her lips curled upward, just slightly. Not a smile, but something close. "Thank you," she whispered. Before I could say anything, she opened the door and stepped out into the rain. She didn't run for the house, didn't try to shield herself. She just walked slowly toward the porch, her steps heavy, her head bent low. I watched her until she disappeared into the shadows of the broken doorway. I sat there for a minute, debating whether to follow, but every instinct screamed at me not to. Something about that house, about her, was wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Finally, I put the car in reverse, turned around and drove off. My chest was tight the whole way home. The rain followed me into my sleep that night, its steady tapping against the windows morphing into whispers I couldn't quite understand. I dreamed of her face, those pale eyes, that not quite smile. I woke up cold, shivering, my sheets damp with sweat. The next day, I told myself it had just been a weird encounter. People live in strange places all the time. Maybe she was squatting there. Maybe she just wanted to be left alone. But the thought of her, standing in that rain as if waiting for me, gnawed at me. It wasn't until a week later that I mentioned it to someone else, an older guy I worked with who'd lived in the area his whole life. "There's nothing out there," he said when I described the road and the house. I swore there was. I told him about the broken windows, the rotting porch. He frowned, thinking. "Sounds like the old Carver place. But that place burned down years ago. Nobody's lived there since the 70s. I told him that wasn't possible. I dropped someone off there, a girl named Lila. He went pale. "Lila Carver." The name sent a jolt through me. "She died in that fire," he said. "Whole family did. Parents, 2 kids. House caught during a storm. Folks said they heard screaming, but by the time anyone got there, it was too late." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her dripping wet in the passenger seat, whispering, "Home." And the next time it rained, I swore I heard knocking at my door. Not loud, not urgent, just a soft, steady tapping, like someone patiently waiting. When I finally gathered the courage to look, there was nothing outside but rain. Nothing at all. But the sound never stopped after that. On every rainy night since, I hear it. The faint knock, the low whisper of her voice somewhere just beyond the walls. And sometimes when I catch the reflection in the window, I swear I see her there, standing in the rain, waiting. Story the end. The rain had been falling steadily all afternoon, the kind of relentless downpour that seemed to flatten the sky and drown out the sounds of the world. By evening, the storm only grew heavier, turning the 2-lane back roads outside of town into a slick maze of water and shadows. I had been driving home from work later than usual, my wipers struggling to keep the windshield clear, when I saw a gas station glowing faintly through the sheets of rain. Its canopy lights flickered in the distance, casting a weak yellow halo across the wet pavement. I pulled in, more out of nerves than necessity, telling myself I should grab coffee and wait a few minutes to see if the rain eased up. The station was nearly empty. A single pickup truck sat at the far pump, its driver hidden inside. The store itself looked tired, the kind of place that hadn't been updated since the 90s, its windows streaked with water and buzzing neon half burnt out. When I pushed open the glass door, the familiar ding sounded, but no one stood behind the counter. The air smelled faintly of mildew mixed with burnt coffee. A cooler hummed along the wall, and the overhead lights flickered occasionally, as if the storm strained the building's power. I walked slowly through the aisles, half distracted by the sound of rain hammering the roof, half unsettled by the silence inside. I grabbed a bottled coffee instead of trusting whatever sludge brewed in their pot. When I set it on the counter, I realized again no one was there. "Hello?" I called out, tapping the bell by the register. The sound echoed strangely, bouncing back louder than it should have in such a small space. A few seconds later, I heard the shuffle of feet, slow, uneven. A man emerged from a back door, wearing the gas station's polo shirt but stained dark around the collar. His hair was slick against his scalp, his face gaunt, like someone who hadn't slept in days. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me as though I'd interrupted something important. Just this," I said quickly, lifting the bottle. He scanned it without a word, his hands trembling slightly. Up close, I noticed his fingernails were filthy, black grime packed underneath them. When he handed me my change, his fingers brushed mine, ice cold and damp, as though he'd been standing out in the rain. "Thanks," I muttered, slipping the coins into my pocket and leaving before he could say anything. Outside, the rain seemed heavier than ever. The pickup was gone, leaving me the only car under the canopy. I slid into the driver's seat, trying not to think about how strange the cashier had been. I turned the key, the engine rumbling to life, and pulled back onto the road. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My headlights cut through the downpour, illuminating nothing but endless road. Yet every so often I thought I saw a shape flicker just beyond the beam, someone standing at the roadside, or walking just out of reach. Each time I blinked, it was gone, leaving only the distorted blur of rain. By the time I reached the stretch of road bordered by woods, my nerves were frayed. The storm turned the trees into dark masses, shifting violently in the wind. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that storms always played tricks on visibility. But then I saw it clearly. Someone standing in the middle of the lane ahead. I slammed the brakes, tires skidding across wet pavement, the car lurching sideways before coming to a stop just a few feet away. My heart hammered in my chest as I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. There was a man. He stood barefoot on the slick asphalt, wearing clothes that looked shredded, clinging to his body as the rain drenched him. His face was pale, nearly gray, and his eyes, though the light was weak, seemed almost too dark, too deep. He didn't flinch as my headlights washed over him. He just stood, arms slack at his sides, watching me. I fumbled for the lock button, pressing it down as quietly as I could, though the storm surely drowned out the sound. He didn't move closer, didn't wave for help. He only stood. My first instinct was to roll the window a crack and ask if he needed help, but something in me refused. Everything about him screamed wrong. I tightened my grip on the wheel, and after what felt like an eternity, I eased my foot back onto the gas. The car crept forward, inch by inch, until my headlights illuminated him fully. His clothes weren't just wet, they were stained, torn in long strips as though cut or clawed. His skin was mottled, bruised, and streaked with something darker than water. When I finally reached the point where I had to either swerve around him or stop completely, he stepped aside without a word. As I passed, I couldn't help but glance sideways. His eyes followed me, unblinking, his mouth twitching into the faintest smile, the kind that felt colder than the storm itself. I pressed the accelerator harder than I meant to, tires spitting water as I sped away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. By the time I reached town, I felt half certain I'd hallucinated the whole thing. Storms and darkness made strange combinations. People saw what they feared most. That's what I told myself. I drove straight home, pulled into the driveway, and sat there for several minutes, hands shaking against the wheel. But when I finally climbed out, something made me glance down. My driver's side door was streaked with wet handprints. They weren't mine. I barely slept that night. Every time thunder rolled outside, I swore I heard the faint tap of fingers against the glass, as if someone stood outside, waiting for me to look. The storm didn't let up until morning, and when I finally stepped outside to check, the handprints were gone, washed away, or maybe never there at all. That morning, I told myself I was done with late-night drives, but sometimes when storms roll through and the streets empty, I catch myself staring into the rain, waiting for the figure to return, and I'm afraid one day he will. The worst part? I found out later that gas station had been closed for nearly 2 years. Story the end. The rain had been coming down since the late afternoon, first as a drizzle that smeared the windshield and darkened the pavement, then as a heavy sheet that made the world outside the car blur into gray and black streaks. David gripped the steering wheel tighter, leaning forward slightly as the wipers swished back and forth in an almost panicked rhythm. He hated driving at night, and he hated driving in storms even more. The highway stretched out in front of him, empty except for the occasional set of headlights appearing out of the curtain of rain, whooshing past and disappearing into the void behind him. His phone buzzed on the console next to him, the screen lighting up with a text from his sister. "You should have stayed. Roads are bad tonight. Call me when you get in." He sighed, glancing at the time. It was a little after 9 p.m., and according to the GPS, he still had nearly 2 hours until home. He told himself he'd be fine, he just needed to focus. The rain was steady, the radio was low, and the rhythm of the wipers was almost hypnotic. Still, something about the night felt heavier than it should have. The rain wasn't just wet, it was oppressive, as though the air itself was pressing down on him. He tried to ignore the way the trees lining the highway seemed to lean inward, their shadows long and bent under the glare of his headlights. He told himself it was just his nerves, just fatigue, just the storm playing tricks on his eyes. Then he saw her. She was standing at the shoulder of the highway, not far ahead, soaked through, her hair plastered against her face and shoulders. Her clothes looked dark, though in the rain and the blur of light, it was hard to tell if they were black or just soaked through. She wasn't waving. She wasn't trying to flag him down. She was just standing there, motionless, her face turned slightly away as if she'd been watching the woods. David's stomach tightened. His first thought was to stop. What if she needed help? What if she'd been in an accident or her car had broken down? But his second thought was a sharp, instinctive don't. Something in the way she stood there, in the way she didn't move as his headlights washed over her, felt wrong. By the time he passed, his grip on the wheel had grown damp with sweat. He glanced into the rearview mirror automatically, half expecting to see her turn or start walking or raise her arm. But the mirror showed only rain-smeared blackness. She was gone. The logical part of his mind told him she'd simply vanished into the dark, maybe stepped back into the trees. But another part, a deeper, older part of him, whispered that she shouldn't have disappeared so quickly, that she hadn't moved at all. He tried to shake it off. People got stranded on highways all the time. He could call the non-emergency line when he stopped for gas, report what he saw, and let the police handle it. That was reasonable. But the image of her lingered, the way she stood there, as if she'd been waiting. The rain grew heavier, the sound on the roof of the car deepening into a steady roar. The wipers could barely keep up now, and he slowed to a cautious crawl. His headlights caught the reflective glint of water on the road, and in that silver sheen he thought he saw movement. His chest tightened. Up ahead, a figure was walking along the shoulder. It was her. This time she wasn't standing still. She was walking with her back to him, hunched slightly as though weighed down by the storm. Her steps were slow but steady, and though she should have been soaked through, there was something about her that seemed untouched by the rain. David felt his heart hammering in his chest. There was no way she could have gotten here so fast. He had been driving at least 50 miles an hour, and the highway had stretched, long and empty. Unless she'd been running through the woods, there was no logical explanation for her to be ahead of him. He considered pulling over again, forcing himself to be rational. Maybe there were 2 different women out there. Maybe someone else stranded. But deep down, he didn't believe that. He pressed harder on the gas instead, wanting nothing more than to pass her and keep driving. As he drew closer, she turned her head just slightly, enough for the beam of his headlights to catch the pale curve of her face. Her eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to lock with his. And then, impossibly, she smiled. The sight of it made his blood run cold. It wasn't the smile of someone relieved to see help. It was a smile that belonged in a nightmare. Slow, stretched too wide, wrong in a way that made his gut twist. David flew past her, his breath ragged in his throat. He didn't dare look into the mirror this time. He didn't want to see if she was still there. The rain continued to pound, each drop like a hammer against the roof of the car. The world beyond the headlights was just darkness and water, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone on the road anymore, that even though he'd passed her, she hadn't really stayed behind. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The highway wound through wooded stretches where the trees crowded close, their branches bending under the storm. He gripped the wheel until his knuckles ached, forcing his eyes to stay forward, forcing himself to breathe. Then, without warning, the headlights caught another shape up ahead. David's chest seized. It was her again. This time she was in the middle of the road. He slammed the brakes, the car fishtailing slightly on the wet pavement as the tires screeched. His heart pounded in his ears as the vehicle shuddered to a stop, just yards from where she stood. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She just stared at him through the rain, her head tilted slightly to the side. Her face was pale, impossibly pale. Her eyes dark pits that reflected nothing of the headlights glaring against her. David's breath came in shallow gasps. He reached instinctively for his phone, his trembling fingers fumbling against the console. But before he could grab it, before he could even blink, she was gone. One moment she was there, standing in the road, and the next the rain was falling on empty asphalt. David's entire body trembled. He swallowed hard, scanning the road ahead, scanning the trees to either side. There was no movement, no figure, no sign that she had ever been there at all. He forced himself to drive again, his foot unsteady on the gas. His headlights carved through the rain, but every shadow on the roadside looked like it could shift, could move, could turn into her at any moment. He told himself he was imagining things, that the storm, the darkness, the long drive, they were messing with his head. But the deeper into the night he drove, the less he believed that. The rain didn't let up. The storm followed him all the way home. And when he pulled into his driveway, the headlights washed over something standing in the middle of his yard. Her, soaked to the bone, her hair hanging in wet strands over her face, her body turned toward him, her head tilted in that same unnatural way. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching him. David sat frozen in the driver's seat, his hands locked on the wheel, his breath fogging up the glass. He couldn't make himself get out, couldn't make himself unlock the door. And then she smiled again, slow and deliberate, before the rain swept across the windshield and blurred her into nothingness. But even when she was gone, David knew the truth. The storm had carried her to him, followed him, and she wasn't finished. She never would be. The rain kept falling. Story. The end. The rain had been falling steadily all evening, the kind of rain that didn't come in waves but poured endlessly, soaking everything in a cold, unrelenting sheet. The air smelled of wet asphalt and old earth, and the only sound louder than the rain was the occasional hiss of passing tires on the slick road outside. I was driving home from work later than usual, my wipers fighting a losing battle against the heavy drops that blurred my windshield. The darkness pressed close, broken only by the erratic flash of headlights and the dull orange glow of street lamps that struggled against the downpour. The stretch of road I took home wasn't well traveled, especially on nights like this. It wound through wooded areas, empty fields, and old farmhouses that seemed abandoned even when they weren't. On clear nights, it was just lonely. In the rain, it felt downright hostile. My tires slipped more than once on the slick pavement, and I gripped the wheel tighter, leaning forward like it would help me see better through the sheets of water. That was when I noticed someone on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just my tired eyes playing tricks. The figure was half hidden in the rain, hunched, dark against darker shadows of the trees. My headlights caught them, though, and it was unmistakably a person. They were standing there with no umbrella, no raincoat, completely exposed to the storm. My stomach sank, and a shiver crawled up my arms despite the heat blowing inside the car. I slowed down, rolling closer, unsure what to do. Stopping for strangers wasn't exactly something I made a habit of, especially late at night on a lonely road, but something about leaving them out there in the pouring rain felt wrong. Their head turned slowly as I approached, pale features flashing in my headlights, eyes reflecting the beams in a way that seemed off, like an animal's eye shine. I tried to tell myself it was just the rain distorting things, but the unease sat heavy in my chest. I stopped a few feet ahead and cracked my window just enough to call out, "Hey, you okay out here?" The person didn't move at first. The rain ran down their face, dripping from their hair, their clothes plastered to their skin. Slowly they nodded, though it looked mechanical, as if they weren't really hearing me. My wipers squealed as they passed again, and for a brief second I thought I saw a strange smile twitch at their mouth before vanishing. "You need a ride?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. There was a long pause. Too long. The figure finally stepped forward, and when they came into the full wash of my headlights, I realized they were barefoot. Mud streaked up their legs, and their feet looked raw, cut in places, like they'd been walking through brambles or gravel for miles. They walked to the passenger side, reached for the handle, and tried to open the locked door. Something in my gut screamed at me to hit the gas, to get out of there, but my hand moved instead to the lock. I don't know why. Maybe I was too shocked, maybe too stupid, maybe some part of me thought I'd regret leaving them. Either way, I unlocked it, and they slid into the seat, the smell of wet earth and something sour filling the car instantly. They didn't say thank you, didn't say anything at all. Just stared straight ahead, rain dripping onto my seat from their clothes, their chest rising and falling slowly, like they weren't even winded from being out there. "Where you headed?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my throat was tight. The person turned their head toward me, and their voice came out hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "Keep driving." I gripped the wheel tighter. "All right, anywhere in particular?" Their lips twitched again, like that almost smile I thought I'd seen before. "You'll know." I wanted to turn around, to drop them off at the nearest gas station or call someone, but the storm was getting worse. The road ahead was swallowed by darkness, and my own headlights barely reached through the sheets of rain. For the next few minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain pounding the roof and the tires hissing over waterlogged pavement. Every so often, I glanced sideways, and each time the passenger was staring ahead with that same blank expression, water dripping from their chin like they hadn't dried at all despite being in the car. Then I noticed their hands. Their fingernails were caked with dirt, dark under the tips, like they'd been clawing at the ground. The sleeves of their shirt clinging tight to their arms were stained with something darker than rainwater. I tried not to look too closely, but my stomach twisted at the thought. "Long night, huh?" I said, desperate to break the silence. The figure slowly turned their head toward me again. Their eyes locked onto mine, and I swear there was something unnatural about them, like they were too wide, too dark, reflecting no light at all. "It's only just starting," they whispered. My mouth went dry. I swallowed hard and looked back at the road, my pulse pounding in my ears. I kept driving, though every instinct screamed at me to pull over and get out. The storm grew heavier, the rain slamming the roof like fists. My visibility dropped so low I could barely see the road lines. My hands trembled on the wheel. I was about to say something, anything, when the figure leaned closer, their damp breath brushing my cheek. "Do you hear it?" they whispered. I flinched, jerking the wheel slightly before correcting. "Hear what?" They tilted their head, listening, their eyes closing briefly. Then they smiled, wide this time, teeth bared. The screaming. I froze. My heart felt like it stopped entirely. The rain battered on, but beneath it, beneath the wipers, beneath everything, I swore I heard something faint. A sound carried with the storm, high-pitched and distant, like voices wailing far away. My skin prickled all over. I wanted to ask who they were, what was going on, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was too tight. I could barely keep breathing. The figure leaned back into the seat, still smiling, eyes unblinking. The car suddenly felt unbearably small, suffocating, like the air had gone stale. The smell of wet earth was stronger, almost metallic now, and I thought I saw streaks on their arms that weren't just mud. We drove on in silence, but the faint sound of screaming followed, growing louder beneath the storm. I don't know how long I drove like that. Minutes, maybe longer. The road blurred together, endless woods and empty fields. The figure beside me didn't move, didn't blink, just stared ahead with that awful smile. At some point, the screaming outside seemed to merge with the storm, almost like the rain itself was carrying it. And then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, the figure spoke again. "Here," they said softly. I looked out. We were on a stretch of road I didn't recognize, though I'd driven this way for years. The trees pressed close on both sides, and the rain seemed even heavier here, the drops hitting the windshield like pebbles. There was no house, no sign of life, just darkness. I opened my mouth to ask where they meant, but when I turned, the seat was empty. My chest seized. The passenger door was still shut, locked. The seat was soaked through, rainwater pooling, but no one was there. My hands shook so badly I nearly lost control of the wheel. The screaming outside was deafening now, louder than the rain, pressing in from all directions. I slammed my foot on the gas, desperate to get away, the tires spinning on the slick pavement before catching. I didn't look back. I didn't stop driving until I saw familiar lights of the town in the distance. When I finally pulled into my driveway, my car still reeked of wet earth and something sour. The passenger's seat was soaked, puddled, though I never saw the door open. That night, I lay awake listening to the rain, and beneath it, I swore I still heard the screaming. I never drove that road again. But sometimes on stormy nights, when the rain pounds the roof and the wind howls through the trees, I catch a whiff of wet earth inside my house. And sometimes I hear footsteps outside my door, slow and barefoot, squelching against the wet ground. The sound always stops when I open the door, but the rain feels heavier each time. And once, just once, I swear I saw a pale face in the reflection of the window, smiling back at me through the storm. Story the end. The rain had been falling steadily since late afternoon, turning the roads slick and the air heavy with the smell of wet asphalt and earth. By the time the sun had disappeared behind a wall of gray clouds, the storm had deepened into something more than a passing shower. Sheets of water hammered rooftops, dripped from tree branches, and splattered against windows with a rhythmic insistence that made the night feel restless, unsettled. I was driving home from work later than usual, with the sound of my windshield wipers keeping a desperate tempo as I navigated the back roads that cut through the woods outside of town. The traffic on the highway had been snarled from an accident, so I took the old county road, the kind of road no one really uses unless they grew up there. My father had always warned me not to drive it in bad weather. Too many blind curves, too many ditches, and no one comes down it at night. But I figured I knew it well enough. I had driven it 100 times in the daylight, but in the storm it felt like another world entirely. The trees leaned over the road like sentinels, their branches dripping and swaying, their shadows flickering in the high beams like something alive. The rain had a way of swallowing sound. My car engine hummed, the tires hissed against the wet pavement, and beyond that, everything felt drowned in a curtain of water. Every few minutes, lightning would flare, illuminating the road ahead, followed by the low growl of thunder rolling through the forest. That uneasy silence that hangs in the air between thunderclaps made the hair on the back of my neck prickle. It was just past 11 when I first saw him. The figure appeared out of nowhere at the side of the road, just beyond the sweep of my headlights. He was standing by the ditch, drenched, his clothes clinging to his body, his face hidden beneath the hood of a dark jacket. I barely had time to process it before I passed him, my headlights sliding over him in a flash. I caught a glimpse of pale hands, arms limp at his sides, as if he hadn't moved for a long time. My foot hovered over the brake, instinct telling me to stop, but something else deep inside told me to keep going. Who stands on an empty road in the middle of a storm like this, with no car, no light, no sign of help? Still, guilt gnawed at me. What if he was hurt? What if his car had broken down and he'd been stranded in the rain for hours? I slowed down until the red glow of my brake lights painted the wet asphalt behind me. In the mirror, I expected to see the figure standing where I'd left him. He was gone. The ditch was empty. The rain still poured down, the road glistened, but the man had vanished. I told myself I had imagined him, that the sheets of rain had tricked my eyes, but my stomach twisted with unease. I pressed the gas and kept driving, the road winding deeper into the woods. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel as my headlights carved out tunnels of light through the downpour. I wanted nothing more than to reach the main road again, to see the lights of town and leave this stretch of darkness behind. But a mile later, he was there again. This time, he stood on the other side of the road, closer to the trees, as if he had simply appeared there. My headlights washed over him, and again I saw the same soaked jacket, the hood pulled low, the pale hands hanging limply. He wasn't hitchhiking. He wasn't flagging me down. He was just standing there, watching. My chest tightened. I didn't slow down this time. I drove past him, heart hammering, the rhythm of the rain loud in my ears. I checked the mirror again. He didn't turn, didn't move, but he was still there, fixed in place as my car slid away into the night. It didn't make sense. There were no side roads, no trails, nothing but thick woods and swampy ditches. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me on foot. Not in this storm. I started to think about turning around and finding another route, but I was already committed. The road was narrow, slick, and curving. I told myself it was fine, that I just had to get through a few more miles and I'd be back near civilization. Still, every shadow seemed to twitch. Every flash of lightning painted the trees with eerie silhouettes, and I found myself leaning forward in my seat, scanning the edges of the road for movement. That was when I saw him a third time. He was in the middle of the road now. I slammed the brakes. The car fishtailed, tires screaming against the wet pavement. My seatbelt dug into my chest as the car lurched to a stop just yards from where he stood. My high beams illuminated him fully now. His jacket clung to his frame, water dripping steadily from the hem. His head tilted slightly upward, though his face was still hidden in shadow beneath the hood. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise a hand or step back. He simply stood, unmoving as if daring me to come closer. My hands shook on the wheel. I laid on the horn, the sound blaring into the storm. Still, he didn't react. He just stood there, rain pouring over him, blocking the road like he belonged to it. I wanted to back up, to turn around, but the road behind me curved sharply. I'd never manage it without sliding into the ditch. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out the rain. Slowly, I eased my car forward. Inch by inch, my headlights glared against his wet figure. I expected him to move at the last second, to step aside. He didn't. And then, he was gone. 1 second he was there, solid and real, and the next, the space in front of my car was empty. The road stretched ahead, wet and gleaming, but he had vanished like smoke in the air. I gasped, slamming my car into park, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. I sat there for a long time, the rain hammering on the roof, my breath fogging the glass. My mind raced, trying to find some explanation. Maybe I'd hydroplaned, maybe the lights had warped the rain into shapes, maybe I was exhausted from the late night at work. But deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. And then I heard it, a soft thud against the trunk of my car. I froze. My eyes shot to the rearview mirror, but I saw only the distorted shapes of rain-smeared trees behind me. Another thud followed, heavier this time, as if something had struck the back of the car. The engine was still idling, headlights cutting through the storm, but the noise had come from behind me. I couldn't breathe. My hand trembled as I reached for the door lock, making sure it was sealed. I didn't dare look back again. I shifted the car into drive and pressed the gas, the tires spinning before catching on the slick road. My car surged forward, deeper into the night, away from whatever had touched it. The rest of the drive felt like a nightmare. Every curve of the road felt endless. Every flash of lightning illuminated trees that seemed to twist closer, looming. I expected at any moment to see him again, standing there, waiting, but he never appeared again on the road. When I finally saw the glow of streetlights in the distance, my body sagged with relief. I drove faster, eager to leave the woods behind. The rain began to lighten as I reached town, the steady sheets thinning into a drizzle. The familiar shapes of gas stations and storefronts appeared, washed in wet neon reflections. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and killed the engine, my chest heaving. I sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to calm my racing heart. I had to convince myself it was just the storm playing tricks, exhaustion warping my senses. But when I stepped out of the car, the truth hit me in the gut. There were handprints on the trunk. Clear, wet impressions smeared across the metal, larger than my own hands, pressed into the rain-slick surface. 5 distinct fingers, long and pale, trailed downward as if someone had dragged them slowly across the car. I stared at them, the drizzle soaking my hair, my breath misting in the cold night air. My stomach turned over, and a chill unlike anything I'd ever felt crawled up my spine. And every time it rains, I can't shake the feeling that if I look too closely at the water streaming down my windows, I'll see him down windows. I'll see him standing there. Story, the end.